Good morning and welcome to the third workshop of Fair Game. I apologise for being on the train this morning, but hopefully that will be not too much of a disruption. We'll be handing over to Sam later on. Yesterday's session was really exciting and interesting, and it really helped develop a whole load of good thinking. We've got another couple of great sessions today. This morning we'll be looking at a lot at how the technicalities of measuring sustainability, and then we'll move on to a very exciting panel this afternoon, which Kevin Barras will be kindly chairing for us today. So that's the kind of big things. Just wanted to update you a little bit about what's been happening overnight. So we've had, as is the way with Fair Game, a lot of kind of exciting interactions. So yesterday we announced Ebbsfleet and Leyton Orient, who are the latest club to join Fair Game. So that's really exciting news. We'll be getting a couple of stories out on that. Obviously, do follow us on Twitter because things are changing rapidly. Myself, I've just come off the phone with David Bernstein, which is David Bernstein and Gary Neville Group. Just been talking about them, and there's a lot of synergy between what we've been talking about here and what they'll be proposing as well, and we'll be working closely with them over the next couple of weeks. So that's all really good. We also look likely that we will get our event in the House of Commons. It looks like that may well be in Westminster Hall, which is probably the most prestigious room in the House of Commons. So that's also quite exciting that we've just got that news through. So that's a quick summary from me. It should be a really great session this morning. I will be dipping in and out because I'm having to travel into town for a bunch of reasons. So apologies for the kind of noise in the background and stuff like that. But I'll stop there and just hand over to John because he's probably got far better reception than I have. And then we'll talk. We'll let him kind of do a little bit of an intro, and then John, over to you just before the train starts bellowing in the background.
Yeah, morning all. And welcome to another workshop. So we've had two, so we're halfway through. Really excited about this one today. As Niall said, we've got some great guests. I mean, I think we've made a huge amount of progress on the first two, and a lot of positive sort of contributions from everybody. You know, working through the format of being a really open forum in the morning, having those presentations, and then being able to sort of debate them and challenge them and look at, you know, possible solutions in the afternoon sessions with our experts. It's working well. So again, this morning we want to have that sort of great dialogue, that great sort of interaction that we've had. Not much more for me to really add, other than, you know, it's exciting to see more clubs coming on board. Niall's having conversations all the time. I've had some good conversations. I'm seeing Stephen Hammond on Monday morning. He's just emailed me just now. We're trying to get, you know, one or two other clubs. So, you know, the momentum's gathering with all that, as we've seen over the past sort of 10 days. So yeah, looking forward to this morning. I'll with no further ado, I'll hand over.
Brilliant. I just to summarise that up, John, as well. Today's session is really looking at where we go with sustainability and how we take sustainability and how we actually achieve it and what that looks like. So we're great to have all the people that really have the details and the knowledge of all of that. I'll hand over now to Sam, and then he can introduce today's presentations, and we'll go from there. So we'll be running up until 11:15. Obviously, just to flag up from Marianne, who's just in the chat, we have VVox running in the background, so please do download the VVox app. You'll have an entry point on there. We'll be running a series of polls and questions throughout the day as well, just to get a sense of where we are and what people's opinions are. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sam to lead you on from there and do the introductions and take the presentations. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Niall. So to give a quick summary, we have three presentations this morning. Firstly, from Mark Middling on football accounting. Secondly, from James Kafari on B corporations. And then thirdly, from Mick Parsons on sort of IT solutions auditing and how a digital solution could potentially help sustainability. So yeah, really looking forward to these. Hopefully they will sort of flow through neatly from one to the next. But I think at this point it's probably right for me to hand over to Mark. I'll let Mark introduce himself to everybody.
Thank you very much, Sam. I'm going to share my screen because in true academic fashion, I've got a lecture full of PowerPoint slides. So I'll just share my screen. There we go, we'll kick that off running. I'm a senior lecturer at Northern University, and my bag, I'm doing my doctorate looking at accountability and accounting reporting really in the football industry. The first thing to say, I think, is this was a bit of a difficult pitch. I was speaking to Niall about, what I should assume about financial knowledge in the room, and we thought it better to err on the side of caution. So I've sort of done that. I've gone with, assuming not a great deal of financial knowledge, which is difficult because some people in the room don't have that much financial knowledge. Other people in the room are Kieran Maguire. So hopefully everybody gets something out of this. Okay. So what's my contribution then? So I've not been analysing the numbers in the accounts. I think Kieran, Dan Plumley, people like that are doing a pretty amazing job at doing that, and I don't think we need someone else doing that. What I've been doing is looking at the quality of reporting that is out there. Okay, so I'm very interested in what is reported, and more importantly, what needs to be reported. And if we had a problem statement in the wake of Bury, there was a lot that was written both about Bury and the wider football context. And one thing that was written about the wider football context is this quote here: "A fundamental problem is a lack of financial transparency, which allows clubs to be badly run and mostly hides this fact from the real world, usually until it's too late." Okay. So the way that I see this, the way I take this is, for me, it's about accountability. Okay. If my PowerPoint catches up with me. And I think it's quite important to understand what we mean by accountability. So the quote that is most often seen is, "It's a duty to provide information to those who have a right to it." Put simply, it's about telling the story and answering questions. Okay. It derives from responsibility. If we have a responsibility to do something, that is a responsibility to action. The accountability is telling the story and answering questions about our actions, about our performance. When we move on to accounts and accounting, the accounting is basically the process of giving an account, usually a financial account. It derives from accountability. That's why the words sound so similar. And the primary reason for accounting is to facilitate accountability. Now, there's many different definitions of accounting, but this is the one that best suits my needs. Most definitions of accounting talk around performance valuation and decision making, allowing users of the accounts to evaluate the performance of an organization and to make decisions based on that. It's usually the decisions of shareholders. So do we buy, hold and sell our shares in the company? But it could be customers and supplier relationships. Is this a company that we want to work with, and so on and so forth. In terms of general current practice at the moment, and this is for all companies, not just football clubs, companies usually produce a profit and loss statement, which shows the sort of financial performance of a company across a period of time, usually a year. A balance sheet, which is often described as a snapshot or a photograph of the organization's financial health at that time. Usually you see a cash flow statement as well, which does what it says on the tin, explains what's going on with the cash in the organization. And then you see lots of notes to the accounts as well. And the notes to the accounts really give a sort of more detailed view of the above three. And then you start to see some narratives too, which usually come in the form of a director's report, a strategic report, and an auditor's report. Larger companies and more socially conscious companies also produce what we call voluntary disclosures. And that's anything that's above what is legally required to be produced. This is an opportunity for companies to sort of explain themselves, to tell their own story in sort of the way that they want. For bigger companies, it usually revolves around things like environmental, social, and governance issues. And these are the ones that are usually accused of being sort of, companies trying to legitimize themselves, trying to make good the social contract by saying, look at all this good stuff that we do, despite the fact we're drilling for oil. So often it can be sort of accused as being, very much a PR exercise, but I would still argue that they're useful nonetheless. In the football industry, we don't really see much of these voluntary disclosures, or sort of social disclosures, as I like to call them. Clubs tend to stick very much to the bare minimum. We don't regularly see much on clubs websites that sort of expands on their accounts, or a deeper annual report or anything like that. It tends to be things that are just given to company's house, and if you're lucky, your club might put a news article on their website summarising those accounts. We usually see an article in the local rag as well, where your local sports reporter will do their best to analyse the accounts and explains what it means to the supporters. One of the biggest issues in the football industry is the use of small company accounts. And this is where, if you are below a certain threshold of revenue, if you have a balance sheet value below a certain value, or you have employees, I think the number is less than 50. If you fulfill 2 out of 3 of those criteria, you can be seen as a small company, and you'll be exempt from producing full accounts. Okay. Now, no football finance presentation would be complete without a quote from Kieran. So here we go. This is one that I really like. Trying to put together League Two figures is a bit like making a jigsaw when you don't have the picture on the front of the box. Okay. And I totally agree with that. The reason it's harder for League Two is because the League Two clubs are the one that tends to be the smaller clubs that fall under this threshold of being a small company. So you end up trying to scratch around in other areas, not just from the accounts, but other areas as well, trying to understand, trying to piece together the puzzle, the jigsaw of what's going on in that company. So I thought a good thing to do when we're talking about accounts in the football industry would be to have a look at a few. So I've picked out 3, and 2 important things that I want to make. One is that these are in the public domain, and the other one is that all opinions are my own, so you can't sue me for saying anything bad. The first one that I've selected is Carlisle United. It's got nothing to do with them being my second team. The reason I've selected Carlisle United is because I generally think they are one of the, if not the best examples of what can be done with accounts in the EFL. I've also selected Preston North End, who pretty much represent the median of accounts, so very much an average set of accounts in terms of its content and what it's saying. And I've also selected Leyton Orient for the reason that in the year that I was looking at, 18-19, Leyton Orient had the shortest set of accounts in the league, just 7 pages long. Okay, so Leyton Orient obviously aren't using the published accounts to discharge their accountability. I think at this point it's probably good to have a quick look through the accounts. So I'll just bring those up. There's Leyton Orient, and there's Preston, and there's Carlisle. Now, if I begin with Leyton Orient, which is over on the right-hand side here, we can see, first of all, we've just got 7 pages. Okay, we've actually got a front page and a contents page. Then we're straight into a balance sheet. We don't have a profit and loss account. We're straight into a balance sheet. And then we've got a few of the directors' responsibilities there. No real director's report, just a list of their responsibilities. We've got some accounting policies that you tend to know how these accounts are being put together, that you tend to see in all accounts. And then we've got a few sort of brief notes of the accounts there. And then we've got this final page, which really doesn't say very much at all. When we look at Preston's accounts, it's a little bit bigger. We've got the front page and the contents page, but then we've got the strategic report, a director's report, albeit very brief. And then we start to get into, obviously, director's responsibilities. We've got an audit report. The one thing about Leyton Orient, we don't know if they've been audited. They haven't stated that they've been audited. Because they haven't stated that they've been audited, and because there's no auditor's report, I would assume that they haven't. Preston have. And then we've got a P&L and the balance sheet, and then we start getting into the notes from there. Okay. So that's a bit better. When we look at Carlisle, what we see is first of all, it's 42 pages long, so it's actually one of the longest sets of accounts in the EFL. And they start off by talking about these voluntary disclosures that I was talking about. These the club putting their own view across in terms of what's happened, and they talk about a good number of things. They talk about the club strategy, the business, their strategic objectives. What happened, they talk about the sustainability of the club, they talk about pride in terms of, honouring the heritage and what have you. There's a really good narrative on the performance, on the financial performance of of the club. They talk about how they've used their football fortune money, which is the prize money that they get for winning, for progressing in club competitions, this kind of thing. And it just gives a very, very good, thorough explanation of everything that's gone on before we start getting into the likes of, the balance sheet and the P&L. Now, we obviously haven't got time for me to take you through all of those sets of accounts. So I've done a bit of a content analysis to try and summarize it. So pages, taking out the front cover and the contents page, the useful page that we have, we've got 40 in Carlisle, 18 for Preston, just for Leyton Orient. Profit and loss account just in Carlisle and Preston. They've all got a balance sheet because they all legally have to. None of them have a cash flow statement. 2 of them have a changes in equity, which is basically just shows the change in sort of ownership, if you like, in terms of the shares and what have you in the club. We have a small income split between Carlisle and Preston, nothing from Leyton Orient. I'll come back to income split a little later. And as I move down, so this is the things on here are very much a financial analysis. If I move on to what I would describe as sort of quasi-financial or legal things, we can see that there's a great deal more for Carlisle. Preston have done it to an extent, and there's a bare minimum from Leyton Orient. When it comes on to what I would describe as a sort of the sort of voluntary social aspects, this is all the sort of value-added things, the things that supporters might really like to look at. Carlisle, I believe, are doing this really well. They talk about the supporter group engagement, they talk about the academy, what they're doing in the community and things like this. Preston and Leyton have taken the decision not to put that into their account. In the football industry then, so if we move on from just looking at those 3 clubs, for me there is a lack of comparability between clubs in the industry. Of 72 EFL clubs, there's probably about 60 different ways of producing the accounts. The reason there's only 60 and not 72 is because these clubs that produce the abbreviated accounts, all the abbreviated accounts start to look very, very similar. And that's why you have sort of a reduced number there. The point I'm trying to make is every club does it slightly differently. For example, when I look at the P&L lines in the accounts, usually in a P&L, what you see is you start off with your revenue, you take off what we call the cost of sales, which in a manufacturing organization would be the direct cost of manufacturing the product that we're selling. That gets us to a gross profit level. We then take off any other operating and admin costs to give us an operating profit. We take off the interest and tax and give us the net profit. When we teach first year business students, that's basically the P&L that we teach them. But if we have a look at Carlisle and Preston, and I'm sorry, I'm quite glad Niall's not on the call anymore because I've actually chosen MK Dons to be an example as well. I can't choose Leyton because they don't produce a P&L. What we can see here is 3 very different looking P&Ls. Okay, so Carlisle United have got their turnover, they've chosen to choose cost of sales and a gross profit. Preston are quite unique in that they actually have a line called staff cost. Not many clubs have that. What you tend to see is either like Carlisle here that have the cost of sales and gross profit, or like MK Dons over here that have got a turnover, and then they just take the operating expenses out. So they don't include this level of gross profit here. But these operating expenses could be anything. They could be admin or operating. We really don't know what's in that figure. It's here's all my revenue, here's all of my cost lumped into one. So there's a number of different ways of doing it, and one of the things I said I'd come back to the income splits. When I did an analysis of the 41 clubs that provide an income split in their accounts, I found 115 different descriptions of income across 10 broad categories. Now it's a bit difficult to actually compare the different types of income for clubs because of the way that they group them together. So one club might have, for example, match day income and hospitality in one area, in one line. Another might lump hospitality with the commercial revenue. So it's actually very, very difficult to split out, what is the income for each of the clubs in each of the areas. Players' salaries are another interesting one. Are they above the gross profit line in cost of sales? Are they below the gross profit line in operating and admin costs? Usually, if there's a gross profit, we'd expect to see them under cost of sales. But in some clubs, it's really not obvious because you see a big number here and a big number here, and it's difficult to know exactly what's in there. Profit on player sales is also an interesting one. Sometimes it's in the operating admin costs, and sometimes it's below the operating profit above the interest and tax. So it just becomes a little bit difficult for a comparison. And if you think about the P&L that I was showing you here, the loss for the year or profit for the year you can work out by looking at the balance sheet. So it becomes the only figure that's actually of any use within the P&L is actually just the turnover, because it's actually very difficult to compare any of the numbers further down across clubs. This is on top as well as the generic problems of accounting that all companies face. They're backward looking, they're myopic, so if they have got some sort of future plan, it tends to be a very short-term thing, doesn't tend to be a long-term thing. Fails to capture intangible factors. I mean, imagine if football clubs could value the social capital that they get from their fans and put that on the balance sheet. Imagine how much that would be worth. And there's a lack of timeliness, as we discussed in quite a lot of detail yesterday. But the biggest problem, in my opinion, is that when we look at accounts, it's very much institutionalized into financial accounting. And the focus of financial accounts is very much towards the financial capital providers, the shareholders and the major creditors of the organization. Any other stakeholder comes a distinct second. Even in the sort of latest sort of social accounting best practice, which would probably be the integrated reporting movement, even the integrated reporting council say integrated reports, which is supposed to be a much more holistic view of accounts, even they say that their focus is on providing information to shareholders. What I argue within my doctorate is there should be a report that is produced aimed at supporters. So we move from a state of where the accountor, the club who's giving the account, is effectively producing an account to an accountee, the person receiving the account of a shareholder, to a state where the accountor is still the club, but the accountee is now the supporter. Why do I argue this? First and foremost, I argue because of the implicit contract. Okay, that contract between that all organizations have with all their stakeholders that's not written down. Okay, it's I've had an attempt at trying to explain it here. Okay. And as a supporter, the implicit contract goes something along the lines of, if you keep my club safe and you try and win as many games as you possibly can, I'll keep supporting you with irrational loyalty. And it's the word irrational loyalty that really separates fans away from customers. If you buy shoes in a shoe shop and a few weeks later those shoes fall apart, it's very unlikely that you're going to go back to that shoe shop and get a second pair of shoes. But if you are a fan of a club that plays dire football week in and week out, you'll complain and bitch about it, but you'll still go and buy your season ticket the following year. Yeah, because it's that sense of irrational loyalty that keeps you doing that. The other reason is the fact that fans are the moral owners or social owners of the football clubs. And I love this image that I found on the BBC website a few weeks ago, talking around the European Super League. On a side note, from conversations we've had this week, just look at who's in that picture. Yeah, it's Generation Z. Yeah, what does that say to Perez? Hopefully, your club or you as a supporter are lucky enough that the owners of your club have the views. Like this is a quote from Michael Wynne-Jones, Delia Smith's husband. Okay, we are the stewards of the club, not the owners. The club belongs to the supporters. Well, if the club belongs to the supporters, surely there needs to be accountability to supporters, not just the owners. So my approach in my doctorate is to adopt the practice of what we sort of term social accounting. It's looking into a lot of these voluntary disclosures. And what we generally mean is it's generally for the majority of companies, not football clubs, but bigger companies, it tends to be about the environment and social aspects. So think Primark and the environmental aspects, the amount of water it takes to make the clothes that they sell, or the social aspects in terms of their supply chain is in Bangladesh, and accusations of underpaying workers and this kind of thing. When we look at football, it changes very quickly to looking at the accountability needs of supporters, because they're supporters of the society that surround football clubs. And one of the phrases that I like from Gray, who was a big academic in this area but passed away earlier this year, very famous guy in this area. Social accounting can be a whole universe of accounting. So, okay, financial accounting just shows one side of what we could report. We could show a whole host of anything else that we choose to. Unfortunately, at the moment, no matter what organization we're in, these are voluntary disclosures. There's no regulation on these. A guy called Jesse Dillard, another big author in the area of social accounting, quite a famous academic, recommends dialogic accounting. Now, what I mean by dialogic accounting, dialogic comes from dialogue, so it's about engagement. It's about a two-way process. Yeah, it's moving from what he describes as accounting-based accountability. So taking what we have in terms of the rules at the moment and assuming that that is the accountability, moving to a position where actually we're going to flip that on its head. And we're going to ask, what should our accountability be, and then produce reports around those conversations. And it's this dialogue, this idea that what should we be accountable for? Well, we talk to our stakeholders and we understand what, we try to understand what they want us to be accountable for, and that's what we base our accounts on. In terms of impact, I always come back to this. What is accounted for shapes it. Nobody likes showing data that makes them look bad. So believe you me, if we start to ask football clubs or if the regulator forces football clubs to produce reports that said, we want you to show X, Y, and Z, that football club will start doing well at X, Y, and Z because they won't want to be seen to not be doing well in those things. In terms of what it can do for fans, in terms of what it can do for clubs too, one of them is context. Someone that I interviewed quite early on in my research was an Accrington Stanley fan, and one of the things that they said was they know Accrington's punching above their weight, and they're quite happy with that. And the reason that they were happy with that was because the amount of information that is put out there on Twitter by Andy Holt and others around Accrington Stanley, they understand the context of the club. They understand that they don't have the revenues of the big boys, okay? So with that context, they understand the success that they've had. It also allows us to benchmark, so allows supporters and clubs to be able to compare, more comparably across multiple areas of performance. And as I say, it will allow fans and clubs to do this. So hopefully there's a benefit to both. Of course, it doesn't come without challenges. If they're going to be voluntary, how do we get clubs on board to sign up to this? When I speak to owners, one of the things that they usually say is, why do fans need to know that? I was talking to one owner of a club and their opinion was, why should I show a breakdown of income? Fans don't need to know that. Now, for my research and my focus groups, my guys have justified why they want to see that, but it's a very difficult thing to try and argue back. Sure, are we trying to change what goes to Companies House and change the regulation from that perspective, or are we just asking the regulator to put something on a club's website? And finally, how do we handle audit? We had an interesting discussion about audit yesterday, but audit, if we do have it, is very financially focused. Auditors won't go over the social aspects, okay? So in terms of a holistic view, how do we audit the whole of the thing? Anyway, that's pretty much the end of my presentation. I apologize for going over time, but I will take any questions that you have, and I thank you very much for the opportunity to give my presentation this morning.
Thank you very much, Mark. I don't know if people have any questions that they wanted to put in the chat. I haven't seen anything as of yet. Well, yeah, no, I think it's really, really good for us to start thinking about what information is out there about clubs and what clubs are doing, their performance, both financially and in other ways. and how that's communicated and how the engagement goes back and forth. Because I think one of the things we talked about yesterday is this concept of accountability. I think it's something that will be important for us to continue to explore as to what that actually looks like. And yeah, what information is needed to make that happen. And the balance then between this sort of standardizing bits of reporting and also allowing clubs the discretion that they need in order to be able to communicate the specific aspects of their vision and strategy in the most effective way possible. Navigating that tension is definitely an interesting one, and definitely one that is worth, I think, thinking about quite carefully. I haven't seen any questions in the chat, I don't think.
Stunned everyone into silence.
Indeed, but yeah, no, really, really good overview, and I think really, really helpful and understandable for people to start some thinking about this.
I mean, Mark, can I just ask a question on a football club and supporters? A lot of all that we've spoken about has been all about supporters, and there are many other stakeholders within the game and clubs, and we've got to get set of solutions that work for the game itself, not just on the basis of supporters. And there's information that needs to be shared with the supporters. It's great for supporters to have access to certain information. There's financial information, but there's also this sort of social information that you talk about. I just see that if it's voluntary, there's no chance. So that's why I think we all agree there's got to be independent regulation and some sort of body that sits where, but it's also the privacy of sort of corporate law, I guess, is that there's certain stuff that can be disclosed and certain that doesn't want to go into the public domain. How do we look at balancing that sort of supporters being a sort of a closed private element of a football club and the stakeholder within that specific football club without information that's possibly sensitive, not going out into the public domain? Is there almost a sort of a parliament or this seat on the board, or who would that be? It's sort of difficult to rationalize where that would sit, doesn't
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's a couple of questions there in terms of what do we know, what information needs to go to other shareholders, to other stakeholders. My research is very much focused on supporters because I'm sort of justifying those as the key stakeholders for a football club. A bit of future research for me would be to look at other stakeholders. I mean, I think it comes back to what we were discussing yesterday about what information goes to the regulator, because Ian mentioned yesterday about commercial sensitivity, and I agree with him to a certain extent. I think there's more out there about clubs and their finances than they care to admit sometimes. But I do agree that the regulator needs to see a different set of data to what the fans need to see. Of course, we wouldn't want anything going out into the public domain that's going to jeopardize the competitive advantage or commercial advantage that football clubs have. So it would be a fine line. I mean, I'm working with some really good guys in my focus group. I've got experts in finance who are also football fans from various supported trusts, and then there's a couple of guys from the FSA who really know their stuff in terms of finance as well, and that is something that we are considering. Where is this limit? We want to show as much as we can to fans, because the more we show, the more accountability we have. But there's a limit, So it is a fine line, and we're trying to find that line.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, I suppose I would add that I think there are lots of interesting lessons that can be drawn from the likes of public accounting. I can see Paul wants to chip in briefly.
It's not a question, it's an observation, really. I used to run a large charity. I'm now chair of 2 large charities. The thing that captures my attention when it comes to the annual audit and accounts is not necessarily the legal aspects, the statutory aspect, it's the charity commission. So, the analogy here is, football, the charity commission exists for the public benefit, to make sure that organized charities do the right thing on behalf of the public. The thing that's lacking, what we're arguing here is that football clubs are a public interest. They they're owned, they're a national interest, whatever you want to call it, but there's no regulator there, like the Charity Commission, to set the standard that is expected. So as I said, it's about making the case to have that regulator, because the reason football fears a regulator, or people sort of argue against a regulator, it's because, you know, football should be run by football, UEFA and FIFA, you know, don't want governments getting involved, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We all know the reasons why. So therefore, the first thing is to make the case for the public interest. So, and I think that's in anything that we're going to be talking about here, it's situational, presenting football as in the public interest. So once you set the public interest, it then flows that if you're then going to have something like that has, because I think that sometimes my mistake is it's, you know, football clubs should be owned by the supporters, or there should be sort of an ownership issue. I think once you start going down that route, once you start, maybe it's a 50+1 argument or whatever it is, it's doomed to failure, in my view. I think you have to have an argument which says that football is in the public interest. There is an issue. It's like the trains. It's like a lot of things. Okay. So once you make the argument that football is more than just an industry that is inward looking after itself, then you can make the case for a public interest, and then you can make the case on the back of public interest why it's important. You accept the recommendations made by Mark in his doctorate, because I agree with them. So excellent. I just think that's the observation that I take from this is you are never going to make football. I'll tell you something now. If charities, I run 2 large charities, you know, when it comes to the public accounts, my finance directors and CEOs, they would try and get away with the minimum, because the first thing they say is, oh, we only have to do this. Yeah. Okay. But then of course,
thank you.
You know, they're going to have to sort of do that. So that's my observation. Sorry.
No, thank you very much. I think there was another point raised in the chat about actually why wouldn't football clubs want to aim for the best, and hopefully this is something we can pick up in our later discussion of, you know, where's the motivation, as Paul said in his charity world, for actually who are the people who are driving for better standards. But yeah, that is, I think, an important question to pick up later that we have noted down. But at this point, I'm going to hand over to James from B Corporation to introduce himself and to give his presentation.
Thanks a lot, Samuel. Really appreciate you having me on this call. I'm very excited to talk a little bit more about B Corp, and we've already heard a lot about stakeholders and how we can be improving our relationship with all of our stakeholders, and that's really what is at the heart of the B Corp movement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just quickly share my screen, because I have a couple of slides to run through, and I won't talk for more than 10 or so minutes. But what I really wanted to do is to just firstly introduce what B Corp is and really what we're trying to achieve with B Corp. Some of you may have heard of B Corp, some of you may not, and talk about how therefore it could be relevant for football clubs, and why the assessment that we use to go through and manage and measure the sustainability of an institution, of a company, could be valuable within this kind of fair game initiative. So what I wanted to really start with was basically what we are trying to do with B Corp. So we understand that there is a kind of a global culture shift in the way in which business is being done. So we're actually moving from a way in which business can act in any way as long as they're making profit. And obviously that has created kind of the societal and environmental challenges that we see now, to actually a way in which we are seeing more and more companies use their business to try and address some of these kind of challenges and to build an economy that's kind of better for everyone. And the impetus from this is very much coming from the public. You know, we've seen lots of instances of this, through popular protests, to people voting with their wallets, to employees wanting to work with employers that are sharing their values. But what we did was we did a poll last year of the great British public, and actually 72% of people said that businesses should have a legal responsibility to the planet and to people alongside maximizing profits. And so the remit of a business is greater. And actually, you know, this is something that's massively live with football clubs. You know, we don't necessarily always call them businesses, you know, we call them community institutions. And that's something that that I've heard earlier on the call. And so this finding was very strong across political divide, across regions, across ages. So it was definitely, it's an imperative and an expectation that's coming from the public on business. And we've seen some of the biggest companies in the world react to this. So you will have seen, you know, Amazon making big pledges, Microsoft, BlackRock, which is the biggest fund manager in the world, you know, all talking about what they are going to be doing around their social and environmental kind of sustainability. And so what essentially we're trying to do with the B Corp movement, and this is focused on all businesses in all industries, but I think this slide is really pertinent for football clubs. And, you know, we had this conversation around the ESL earlier, I heard it. And, you know, this whole narrative really fits into that, where we are actually trying to move from an old idea of doing business, which is the business of business is just business, make money, as much money as quickly as possible for your shareholders, to actually a new way of doing business, a new model that is about your stakeholders. Shareholders are part of that stakeholder group, but so are your customers or your fans, so is the environment, so is society, so are your employees. And so essentially that's what the B Corp movement is here to do, is to build that community of businesses that are committing to that way of operating. And they do that in two key ways. So firstly, they meet high standards of social and environmental performance, and they measure that, and they're verified against that. And secondly, they are legally committed to kind of consider the impact of their decisions on all stakeholders and not just shareholders. So for those of you that know that, you know, the company law in the UK, you know, fiduciary duty overrides everything. So a standard company is only liable to make more money for their shareholders, essentially. And so B Corps have actually committed to making decisions based on all of their stakeholder interests, not just their shareholder interests. And this is a global movement. So there are B Corps around the world in over 70 countries, almost 4,000 B Corps now, and in every industry. And you may recognize some of the brands that you see there, you know, from Innocent Drinks here in the UK to, you know, Ben & Jerry's and Patagonia and places like people like that. But there are also very mainstream companies that are there, people who are in financial services, in construction, in logistics. So it is not just kind of a consumer product certification. And the reason why I wanted to, or you know, in talking with Niall, it was an interesting thing for me to bring to this group, is that the thing that sits behind B Corp is this assessment. And this is where companies answer multiple questions across how they interact with their stakeholders. So you're looking at what your governance is, how you treat your workers, what do you do within the community, what's your supply chain look like, are you managing your impacts on the environment, and how do you interact with your customers? So all of those stakeholders are captured in this B impact assessment, and you're kind of measured against that. And that's where I think it could be relevant and interesting for this initiative. This assessment is essentially a way in which companies answer a number of questions, like a self-assessment, and it shows how a company is proactively managing their sustainability and proactively kind of enhancing their relationship with those different stakeholders. And so the idea is that companies can go through this assessment, and in going through the assessment, they can benchmark themselves, they can see where they are today, but they can also get ideas of how they can improve in all of these different areas. And so there are a number of kind of, the questions, as I'll go into, are set out in different ways, but each way, when you can kind of see the question, you can also see what are the kind of good, better, and best answers that companies can be doing. So companies going through this can kind of see the best practice in each of these different areas. So just to kind of give an understanding of what companies are being asked when they're going through this assessment, you know, it's extremely broad. So it covers things like, you know, what are your ethics and transparency policies? You know, do you have set kind of goals for career development of your employees? What's your civic engagement policy? You know, how much volunteering do you do? How much do you give to charity? Are you monitoring your greenhouse gas emissions? Are you setting targets to reduce them? You know, how are you engaging your customers? What kind of interaction do you have with your customers? And so, in all of these areas, the company is being kind of asked questions and then being kind of provided a score based on that, and then you can benchmark that against other people that have taken the assessment, and then also against yourself, your own company over time. And just to give an idea of the kinds of questions you're going to be asked, so like the assessment will ask, you know, how does your company take part in civic engagement? And you can always see different answers there. So you might kind of you might use company facilities to host community events. You know, I know some companies, in fact, have, or some football clubs have actually used their stadiums as vaccination centres and stuff like that. But you can also see other ideas around kind of making financial or in-kind donations that you might not already do, but it kind of gives you the impression of those are the things that we could do to improve our impact further. Then, you know, you've got quantitative indicators. So what percentage of your energy use actually comes from low impact renewable sources rather than fossil fuels? So that's all about kind of how are you managing your environmental footprint. It looks at the policies that you have within your company. So do you have a policy around your code of ethics, and how entrenched is that? How comprehensive is that? And then it'll ask about outcomes as well. So like, are you doing employee engagement surveys? You know, what are the results of that? Have you got targets to improve that, etc. And so finally, what those questions really do is that they essentially provide a company with an outlook of their overall score on the impact assessment, and then how they're scoring across the different kind of stakeholder areas. And therefore you can kind of, as I said before, use that to benchmark against other companies that have used this, or yourself over time. And what I would say, because I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have on this, but what I would say as well is that for any business, or you know, any company, any football club, this assessment itself is a public good. So it's completely free and confidential to use. So any business, there's over 100,000 businesses who use this worldwide. So even if, you know, I only talked about B Corp at the start there, just to give you an impression of what B Corps are and ultimately what we're trying to achieve. But even if a company is not interested in becoming a B Corp, this assessment should give an idea of where you are right now and give you ideas about how to improve your impact across these different areas. And so I would, definitely recommend that if this is of interest, then please just go on to beimpactassessment.net and you can start answering those questions and seeing how your impact is being measured. But I'll stop there and just see if there's any questions that come up.
Thank you very much, James, for that overview. Happy to take some questions out of the chat. I think maybe if I just kick off with hopefully what's a fairly simple question is, what's the difference between the sort of legal commitments you're talking about in B Corp to consider stakeholders and the existing legal commitment that gets talked about a lot now in Section 172 of the Companies Act to have regard to various stakeholder interests? Yeah,
it's a great question actually, and it's something that we thought about a lot. So for those of you that might not know, Section 172 is the director's duties of the 2006 Companies Act, and it basically sets out some criteria that directors can use to think about other stakeholders in decision making. But when we reviewed this with the lawyers that we work with, it was determined that actually in the existing Companies Act, fiduciary duty overrides all of those. So it is there, but fiduciary duty still ultimately overrides them. So actually this legal change that I spoke about takes the text from Section 172 of the Companies Act, and it requests that companies take that text and use that to amend their articles of association. And the determination from our lawyers was that if companies do that, then that actually raises this idea of stakeholder interest alongside shareholder interest. And so what you're asking a company to do once they have those articles amended is that they make decisions based on an optimization of the impact of those decisions on all stakeholders. So it's not saying every time we are going to think about just the environment, or just our employees, or just shareholders. It's every time it is an optimization of those impacts across those different stakeholders. So yeah, great question. It's a really live discussion, and something that we're doing a lot of work on in the kind of policy space, and thinking about how we can actually work to improve the Companies Act for all companies, not just B Corps.
Thank you very much, James. I see Mark has his hand up.
Thank you, James. That was a really, really good presentation. And to be fair, I think we're singing from the same hymn sheet in terms of a lot of the messages that we were both saying there. I see Grimsby Town have become a B Corp. I wasn't sure if you were aware of that. So you've already got a football club on board. I love the idea of a B Corp, but I have some reservations. And my main reservation is around the sort of 50-50 element of, we're still trying to make a profit as well as doing all of this extra stakeholder commitment stuff. And there was a debate yesterday over whether football clubs should aim to make a profit, or profit might be the wrong word, whether football clubs should be a vehicle for wealth for their owners. Let's put it that way. So although I love the idea of B Corp, for me, I think it might be more of a new vehicle that might be something along the lines of, I don't think anything exists in law at the moment that's right, but has a sort of B Corp sort of philosophy, allows a private ownership, but has more of a social focus and removes that profit focus. That's probably for you and the wider debate, but I just wondered how you would think about that for football clubs who, it can be argued profit is not an aim in the traditional sense of,
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think what we are doing in terms of, obviously our assessment is not kind of focused on football clubs. It's kind of agnostic to sector, so it's all industries around the world. And so yeah, in the way in which companies operate in all different industries, I guess what we are trying to say is that yes, companies can make profit, and they can do it alongside, making significant commitments to the environment and stuff. And actually, increasingly, we're seeing through the performance of things like ESG funds, so environmental, social, and governance funds, that actually you can think of profit and purpose. It's not profit or purpose anymore, it's profit and purpose. And even some companies profit through purpose. Some companies are making massive strides by actually really doubling down on what they are trying to achieve through their business. And so, yes, I think the reason why, Niall invited me on today was really to talk more about the assessment and how it could be used, just rather than big football clubs necessarily becoming B Corps. There is some interest in that happening, but really about football clubs using potentially the assessment just to kind of get an understanding of where they sit along their kind of stakeholder relationships. But yeah, I think on a personal level, yeah, I think the idea of football clubs being community institutions is really important, and it's something that we've seen in the ESL, that fans are not customers. They are custodians and should have a say in kind of the way in which football clubs are run. So yeah, it's certainly not something that's currently in UK law. My understanding is that most football clubs are limited companies, and so are subject to company law. They're not KICs, they're not community interest companies. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that the legal framework has caught up with what fans expect, of their football clubs, essentially.
Thank you very much for that, James. I haven't seen any further questions. As a reminder, I do want to encourage people to continue to fill in the VVox poll, which is live. Details are in the chat. Do pick that up, take a moment to have a look at that, because we really appreciate your views. And yeah, I think we've had some interesting presentations so far on football and on how companies are thinking about some of these sort of more social obligations. And now I think we are going to hand over to Matt from ClubView, who is going to talk a little bit more, I think, about how we might measure some of these things. But Matt, can you introduce yourself properly and give us a bit more background on what you're going to talk about?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Sam, and thank you. It's been really interesting speaking to all of you guys, last week and this week on the workshop yesterday. What I want to do is just introduce myself and start to switch the conversation a little bit to what could the system or what could a practical solution be to actually deliver the change that everybody's talking about, and whatever that change is going to be. So, thank you for the opportunity to be involved and to tell a little bit of our story. I'm just going to tell you what we've been doing over the past 2 years at ClubView to do this. So I'm just going to share out my screen. There we go. Okay, so a bit of my background. Thanks. So I've worked in football for 16 years. I always wanted to work in football. It was always my dream. I was never destined or blessed with a wand of a left or right foot or even the fitness to run around pretty well for 90 minutes. I wasn't wealthy enough to go in at boardroom level, so I had to find another way in. So all of my studies, everything was focused around the finance and operations side of football. So the finance side has been a passion of mine since I wrote my dissertation on this in 2005. And I've worked at clubs over those 16 years of all sizes across the pyramid, from Arsenal to Stockport County and several others in between. I co-founded ClubView back in 2019. I'd seen firsthand in football, it was starting to embrace technology and data and even artificial intelligence. A lot of this was being embraced on the pitch in terms of player performance and so on, but also in fan engagement and an area that I know very well, which is fan data and digital fan engagement. So I'd seen this, but there was nothing really on the finance side, no systems to back that up, and that was where the conversation started around ClubView. So we wanted to bring some of that technology into the financial area of football. And we're a group of like-minded people from technology, data science and football backgrounds. Mick, one of my colleagues on the call here, was involved at Coventry City several years ago. And our chairman is Dick Knight, who was chairman of Brighton from 1997 to 2009. And really they were in a whole load of trouble on and off the pitch at that point. They were bottom of the whole league, and Dick was able to turn that around and progress them up the pyramid with the move to the new stadium and actually get them up to the championship where they've moved on from today. So that story is the one that we want to tell and how we can help to protect that. So what is ClubView? Well, we believe it's the first technology product focused on financing football. Our research backs this up. In my experience, I haven't seen anything like it. We've talked to leagues and FAs across Europe as well, and that's been backed up. It allows real-time financial reporting across leagues for the first time. It will also benefit clubs by offering a range of insights and benchmarks and allow them to really understand how they're performing. And it will start to bring in consistent reporting methods. So it follows on very, very nicely from the great talk that Mark gave earlier and the conversations we were having yesterday about how clubs are reporting and how difficult it is for leagues or whoever's going to govern them to manage. And of course, with the conversation about independent regulation, any independent regulator is going to need an independent platform and system to strengthen that governance or licensing. We need to offer that consistency across the pyramid if we're going to really promote sustainability. So I'm not going to dwell on the problem because we've covered it a lot in the previous talks, and Mark covered it very well. And for me, the really key issue that we need to address is the lack of real-time information. I said it yesterday, and I'll make no apologies for saying it again. Where you're using the retrospective data, issues can only become apparent after an event, or indeed they can be forecast with salary cost management protocol, for example. It's a lot of forecast revenues, so both of them can have inaccuracies or cause problems down the line. Financial fair play breaches, they result in fines the following season, or points deductions that can't be applied at the time, or even worse. And I think, listening to Darren talk yesterday about Berry and about their story, really, it's really something that we've got to do something to stop. And I think the frustration that nothing was in place to stop that, and nothing really has changed in the 2 years since then, is a frustration that we share, and we want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So what were the problems that we had to solve? So back in the good days before the pandemic, we sat round tables in WeWork in London, where we were working from. We took advantage of as much of the free coffee as we could, and we sat around the table for days and weeks on end, saying there's a real challenge here, because we're bringing this technology to an industry that perhaps doesn't want to change, perhaps doesn't want more transparency. We need to take this step by step, and we need to think of all the stakeholders and make sure that we build a product that's going to really help across the whole industry. So the first step was the digitalization of processes, and there's too many spreadsheets, too many forms, too many different ways of reporting and collating data. I had a frustration myself from my roles at clubs that a lot of data was being provided to the league, and it was just a one-way street. It was provided and just disappearing into a black hole. I wasn't getting use of that data. So the better use of the data that's already collected. Clubs could see this as a barrier to success. We've talked about trust and transparency and around governance, and this really needs to be a cultural change. And remember, we were talking back in 2019, so it's pre-pandemic, never mind pre-European Super League. So really, was that appetite there? The issues were certainly there, but was the appetite there? We wanted to ensure we could maintain the sporting integrity. So bringing the deterrents into real time and allowing leagues to really understand what was happening at clubs in real time would help to maintain that through the pyramid, so that any punishments could be applied there and then. A really key one, we had to show value to clubs. If clubs were going to really embrace this and buy into a platform like ours, we really had to show the value to them. And the way we're called Clubview for a reason. The way we see to do that is to use the data that they have to provide to really produce a wealth of reports, insights, rankings, so that clubs can use that to make decisions in areas of their business where they can increase revenues or decrease costs. We wanted it to apply across the whole professional pyramid. I certainly was very keen. We didn't want this to be a nice to have product, a top-down approach. We could have built a fully integrated dashboard or BI tool, call it what you like, and sold it from the top down to the clubs that, as a nice to have, that would have improved their internal reporting, but it wouldn't really have that impact that we were looking for across the whole pyramid. So it had to apply across those. And we really wanted to focus on a system that could reward as well as the negative or what's seen as negative. So revenue opportunities as well as cost control. It's not all about cutting costs. It's about looking for opportunities and really benefiting the game as a whole. So it was quite a challenge for us. I'm sure you'll agree. And I'll just take you through how we've worked on that over the last 2 years to try and overcome some of those challenges. So what was our process? The first thing we had to build was a viable commercial model for the clubs and for ourselves. So we developed the platform on the basis that we would implement it across a league level, so that every club would be involved in the platform. The economies of scale, it made it affordable for clubs, and it allowed us to really build this product so that it could be applied at levels and at steps lower than would otherwise be achievable by going club by club. But it had to be a commercial model viable for ourselves as well. And so we want to take the same philosophy as we're trying to promote with clubs. We've self-funded to this point. We will take investment at the right moments, but it will be for long-term sustainable decisions that will enable us to develop and grow. We can't just, as a tech company, we can't just take the money, burn it, and build and burn, as we say. because if we keep doing that and take an investment at the end of every year, we're no different to the clubs that we're trying to help. We're in exactly the same position. So our philosophy is very much sustainable ourselves. So we've studied the existing league processes within the UK, and also obviously the more European licensing model with the FAs. We've studied both of those to make sure that our platform will be able to help in both scenarios. And then we've defined a really clear 3-step process of what we want to achieve with this platform. So step 1, very much as I talked about, is to digitalize the existing process. Step 2 is to enhance that process by looking at the data that's collected. Is there potentially a few more data points that could be collected? And I'll talk through that a little bit more in a moment. And then step 3, to actually start to forecast and actually score clubs and give a financial health scoring that's consistent across leagues and across the pyramid. We've worked with pilot clubs and demos. We've worked with Oxford United, so you'll see on the screen quite a lot of the examples are Oxford United examples. They've been working closely with us since December 2019. And this year we've been working with Salford City since January as well. So we've been working with pilot clubs in the EFL, but also with demos to other clubs at National League and EFL level, because we want this product to be built by clubs and to really make sure that it's going to help clubs. So it's built with club feedback in mind. And then the final point, just on the technology data and football side, you know, we've built together this team that are collaborating on it. We've got to the stage that we're at because everybody's invested in this and everybody has the same passion for it. We challenge each other, so we're not a group of technology experts trying to push a system onto football without understanding football club operations. But equally, we're not a group of football club operators, if you like, just building a nicer version of spreadsheets or something just because that's all the way it's always been done. And we have very interesting conversations when the technology team and the developers are telling us, no, this is the way to build a product to deliver that. And we almost ourselves, even though we're trying to implement change, can be tempted to say, oh, I'm not sure the clubs will change or will allow that. And we're trying to really bring change to the industry. So where are we today? So we've built a financial intelligence data platform. It's fully secure. We work to ISO 27001 standard. It's got multi-factor authentication. It's like logging into a banking app. It's far more secure. Actually, one of the barriers that clubs often tell me or put up is I wouldn't want to put that kind of data into a system where it was potentially accessible. But at the same time, it's being managed at the moment on spreadsheets, which are being sent back and forth via email, you know, with a password if they're very security conscious, but without if they're really not. So that's a concern that we take very, very seriously, but actually, you know, as a positive to this system rather than being a concern. We look at data collection and we've worked on integration with systems, importing data from other club systems and data entry. We know that the resource that we've got at some of the clubs that we want to serve, we don't want the system to take up any more resource than is currently needed. And clearly we need the cost to be sustainable for them. Mark talked a lot about the consistent reporting methods equaling the comparable results. Well, that's exactly what we want to deliver so that leagues and regulators can get that data that they need in more real time. And we can act as a gateway to get that data to any regulator, but also benefit the club. So rather than just any regulator just being another you know, another platform or another spreadsheet, another format of figures that clubs have to work out and input and send somewhere else that they get nothing back for, we would make sure they got all of the reporting around that. So just a few specific examples how we could have helped. You know, certainly from the past year, the distribution of grants we saw in the National League, the issues that they had trying to fairly distribute the grants that they received from Sport England. With this system in place, they would have known the match day revenues that they were replacing at each club across previous years. They would have seen how they were performing that season, and the system would have been able to tell exactly how much they were missing compared to previous years based on data and historic data. So they could have distributed that far more fairly and maintained that sporting integrity. We spoke yesterday a lot about salary caps and actually allowing a kind of implementation of a salary cap that's not a flat cap. To me, I personally think is the way forward and has to be. But at the moment, the EFL, when they introduced it in League 1 and 2 with the flat cap, how much of that was down to not having the systems in place to be able to manage a variable cap, and how much was down to just lack of being able to deliver what they needed to govern that. Looking at match day attendance and revenue opportunities, just a couple of quick sort of real life examples of how clubs might use this every day. So EFL clubs already provide their attendance and their revenues to the EFL for each match day. They provide information like stewarding costs, for example, as well, which are deducted from the overall match day revenues to give a profit. But this data isn't used at all. So, for example, in our system, we know the attendance, we know we'll know the stewarding costs. We can convert that to a cost per head, for example. So clubs can see where they rank in their league on cost per head for stewarding and use that to focus in on areas where they need cost control or where they need to renegotiate. There's a lot of other ways as well, commercial benchmarking, understanding when you get promoted into a league, if you got from the National League to the EFL, for example, what's the average sponsorship revenue in League 2? You need that information there at the time, not from an annual report or an annual benchmark. And then, of course, with the independent regulation. So there's a lot of potential here, and Mark mentioned about holistic view with the social and financial side. We can build the financial reporting modules, but also social ones. So just a quick example here, if you used social media following, for example, and aggregated that across the clubs, clubs can understand how they're performing, but the league has also got a dashboard they can use to show growth across the league and get better central sponsorship deals. So it's really a platform to benefit everybody. And we build it bespoke for each level of the game. So we'll be able to build modules that are relevant depending which level the clubs are playing at. So why are we here? The system's ready to be implemented. We've been developing it for 18 months. We had a really good debate yesterday about what sustainability is. And I really enjoyed that. What should the reform and what should the regulation be? Now, clearly as a group, we've got our own personal thoughts and opinions on that and input on that, which we gave yesterday. But actually, as club view, what we want to say and the really key point we want to get across today is, we're the system to go and deliver that. So we want the experts and we want the panels and we want you guys to be discussing what that regulation and what the best way forward is for football. We want to take away the concern of how would that be managed, how would that be delivered, how would clubs benefit. We want to take the concern over how completely off the table, because that's our problem. That's what we want to be our problem. So if our role in this can be to take away the concern over how, that should allow much better conversations to happen. So just to finish, we've got obviously Oxford United here, pilot club. If any clubs are on here that want to see an actual demo of the platform, do contact me. I'm more than happy to organise that. And actually, I just want to finish with an analogy, just so that you can remember exactly what we stand for or what we're offering in simple terms. So I love a good analogy. I used one yesterday about the environment and climate change being, everyone has to be in it together for it to make a difference. I see club view, every car, it's mandatory that every car has to have a speedometer in it. So you have to have a speedo in your car. If you're driving that car, you can see the speed. The signposts are there to tell you what speed you should be going. It's not the speedo's job to stop you from speeding. It's not the speedo's job to tell you how fast you should be going. But when you do get pulled over, you can't say you didn't have the information in front of you, because it's there, it's mandatory. You've got the same information as everybody else on the road. So you're all equal and you're all treated equally when it comes to that. So that's the simplest way to think of what we're trying to achieve here. We want to be the speedo in the car, but we want to make sure that it's a platform that really pushes back and benefits to the club. Thank you, that's everything.
Thank you very much, Matt. That was a really good presentation covering. Yeah, it was really good to see how far you've got in terms of the practicalities of making this work. That I think was a really good way to round off our set of 3 presentations. So thank you to all of our speakers this morning. I think we've picked up some interesting thoughts, some of which were picked up by the panel, and some of which we'll pick up in the discussions later on today. So thank you everybody for that. A reminder again that the VVox app details are in the chat. We're going to be continuing to use that throughout today. Is really useful to us, so we'd appreciate it if you can get involved with that. But I think at this point, we're going to take a 15-minute break, just so get a cup of tea or whatever it is you want to do, and we will see you back here at 11:30. Thank you very much, everyone. Hello, welcome back, everybody. I will just give people another minute or two to come back from the breaks. It's not quite 11:30 yet. But yeah, hopefully in due course, we'll be able to kick off our panel session following the discussions we've had this morning so far about accountability in football, and how we might practically think about encouraging football clubs to be more sustainable, including getting the data to do that. So yeah, it is. I'm really looking forward to this panel session. We've got a range of very experienced people running through, and yeah, it should be a really, really interesting discussion. I think we would appreciate it if, the panel are going to talk particularly about what the practical solutions are to sustainability, because the aim of our workshops and work today is to really try to drill in and develop some of those practical solutions. I know some of the things that we were thinking about yesterday include questions about how you control costs, how you incentivize in sustainability, and how you protect these core social assets and social responsibilities of football clubs. I know people have alluded to this morning. So without further ado, with that sort of framework about practical solutions to sustainability, I'm going to hand over to Kevin Boris, who's going to be chairing today's panel session. Kevin, if you could introduce yourself, and then either get the other panel members to introduce themselves or introduce the other panel members, that would be great. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to Kevin.
Thank you very much. Welcome everybody. Hello viewers. This is the workshop 3, and it's the 1-hour panel session in which we're going to be talking about how to incentivize sustainability. So without being too political and too deep, we do kind of live in a society of what's in it for me. I also work in the transport sector, and companies I've been working with have been asking passengers and travelers, would you consider not driving to work and taking the tram or the bus or the train or cycling? And the response tends to be, I would do, but only if I get something out of it. So is football governed by the same people? Are the people that want something in return, are we the same people? Are we those people? So we're going to find out. Now, I have 4 people down as a panelist, but we do clearly have far more people than that. So hello, John Scales. Welcome back. Thank you for that. I spoke to John last year as part of our discussion program. You may see in the background a lovely brand new sustainable football ground that is Plough Lane. I make no bones about who I support, and you can see that. So whoever took that picture, it wasn't me. Marvellous, thank you. So we are joined by, first of all, I'm going to go through in order, Kieran Maguire, who is the co-presenter of the Price of Football podcast. Kieran, welcome.
Thank you.
And I know you're co-presenting Mr. Day, so nice to finally meet you. I'm also joined by Jonathan Booker, who is a multidisciplinary sports agent. Like the sound of that. That's a very hard word for me to say. So maybe we can talk to Jonathan about other sports and how other sports are aiming to be sustainable too. Jonathan, welcome. Where is Jonathan? Yeah. I can hear him. There we are. Excellent. We're also joined by Mark Middling. Mark is the senior lecturer in accounting at the University of Northumbria. Mark, thank you. There he is. Yeah, waving is good because there's so many people on the panel. If you can wave, that'd be very handy. Also joined by Paul Thorogood, the former CEO of the Football Foundation, who is now a member of the Government's Standards Committee. Paul, welcome. Mark is here, Mick is here, and also John. And I think, have I missed anybody out? Who have I missed out? No,
I think that's everyone who's formally on the panel, yes. Kevin. So you can see a wide group of us, but the panel is you and the 4 panelists you've introduced.
If anyone else wants to join in, then do feel free. Okay, so I've divided something into a few questions. Most of them are multiple choice questions. I've got 2 strands to every question. So I'm going to start with you, Kieran. So the first question is this. What are the barriers to the implementation of sustainability measures in football? And second question of that, point 2, is how do we measure? What are the metrics for measurability for sustainability?
In terms of the barriers, it's individual stakeholders or individual stakeholder groups are not necessarily interested in sustainability. If you talk to a Manchester City or a Chelsea fan, and I did some work which appeared to indicate that those are the 2 clubs which have the biggest collective losses in Premier League history. There's no issue as far as the fans are concerned in sustainability. That the clubs make losses, and provided they've got somebody to underwrite the losses, then they can go ahead. And it's the fact that we've got a meeting of minds. We've got different business models whereby there are some clubs who have owners that see themselves as custodians and want simply to own the club or be involved in the club for X years and then pass it on to somebody else in good conditions. And then we've got other owners who have recently come into the game. They're looking for the glory, they're looking for the promotion to the Premier League and all of the kudos that brings. And sustainability isn't an issue for them because they don't expect to be around in 5 years in terms of their involvement with the club. So I think that's the barriers. Also, I think as football fans, I occasionally talk to media organisations, and the first question I'm always asked is, can we afford to buy player X, player Y? Why aren't we spending money?
Yeah.
So the direction of travel from the fan base is sustainability. Yes, it's a nice furry cuddly thing, but actually, if there's a chance to spend £100 million on Harry Kane, that's going to attract my interest. So until all parties involved in the game realise that it's something that we do want to be able to hand over to our grandchildren in a good financial state and as community assets, then I think we've got a genuine problem that fans from some clubs and some club owners and those are the people involved. And from a player's perspective, average career length is 7 years. They're trying to maximise their revenues. Sustainability is somebody else's problem. So I think that is those are some of the key barriers in terms of measuring things. We can look at traditional financial metrics, but I'm not sure that they necessarily work. And certainly, I can, if somebody says, what's the profit going to be? My standard answer is, well, what do you want it to be? And I had some information from a Premier League club connection overnight as to, this is our new way of getting around financial fair play. And I go, well, that's interesting. And whilst that mentality exists, how can you measure or have metrics which ultimately have some degree of latitude, and the individuals concerned and the clubs concerned who want to get around them will find ways around them. So yes, we can have traditional financial metrics. Yes, we can have fan satisfaction surveys, and clubs such as Lincoln City come out of those extremely well. Accrington Stanley as well. So in terms of engagement, that's great. But if you are a Manchester United fan in Miami or Nairobi or Hong Kong, you're not particularly interested in that. You are just focusing on the short term and winning the next match and signing the big next player, because many people perceive football success to be linked to spending money.
Yeah, true. So Paul, can I come to you next? So do you think the idea of measuring sustainability is entirely, it's bespoke for all 90, and I have to recognise, all 92 clubs in the Football League and Premier League? Everyone is different. So what works for Leicester with the family that owns Leicester? They did a fantastic job for not just Leicester City, but Leicester the city. And where you look at other rich families come in and don't do so. Look at what happened at Blackburn with the Venkies. That the idea that when they bought Blackburn, didn't know they could be relegated, that kind of thing. So it's not, with the money that comes in, it's not immediate sustainability, and it's also not immediate success, and it's not immediate bad stuff as well. So how do you think we measure it then? What are the metrics?
There is a measurement, but form follows function. Anybody who's done an MBA or whatever will tell you that. And you've got to get the structure right first. So when I look at sustainability, I look at sustainability of the environment. I look at the sustainability of the pyramid. At the end of the day, that's what everybody got upset about. Period wasn't going to be competitive. So effectively for me, it's sustainability. How do you raise standards? And how do we heard this morning, about how football clubs, it's almost like a race to the bottom when it comes to only giving information they absolutely have to in their accounts, etc., etc. So how do you raise standards? For me, it's about setting the standard. It's about what is the minimum standard that we are aspiring to, maybe a stretch standard. So what does a healthy pyramid look like? And we can talk about you shouldn't have cliff edges and financial cliff edges, et cetera, and then look at what is the club responsibilities to that sustainability. So what is it? So Kieran saying is, as a supporter of Chelsea or whoever doesn't really care about sustainability, and the club, quite frankly, is in it for different reasons. But what is that? What are their club's responsibilities? So I'd like just to correct, first of all, I'm not on the government standards committee. I'm on the parliamentary standards committee, and that's a slightly different thing.
It is. I'll blame my note giver for that. I apologise.
No. But the thing is that the difference there is there's 650 MPs, and they're all different. The analogy is very, very strong. There's a code of conduct, and one of the things the standards committee has, and there's a commissioner, standards commissioner, and there's also other various regulators, as IPSA and various other regulators, but they're all aspiring to raise standards, and the code of conduct establishes what the minimum standards are, along with the Nolan principles and all the rest of it. And then when somebody falls below that standard, that's when the commissioner comes in. But the commissioner is there also to assist. So one of the things that football fears about a regulator is that it's there just to beat football clubs up. It should also be there to support and help. And that's, for me, is the way you should sell it. So first and foremost, what does good look like in terms of a structure, a pyramid? And I think we sort of got that. Everybody knows what that is. And then within that structure, what is going to drive the best standards and the best behavior? And at the moment, there are too many cliff edges, and there are issues around that. And then what is the football clubs, the 92 football clubs, what is their responsibility to that? And then hold everyone to account. And then from then on, then you apply the performance framework or regime for it. And there are a number of ways of doing it. And I used the analogy early on around, I chair two a global charity and another charity. And when it comes to the accounts, as I explained this morning, the thing that really worries people like me and the CEO and everybody else is the Charity Commission. It's what does the Charity Commission want? Which the Charity Commission basically is in the public good, and actually it sets a framework of which what your accounting should be like, and what your minimum report should be. And then on top of that, we heard from B Corp this morning about effectively that's an ESG assessment of football clubs and the framework. So for me, it's really get that framework right, make sure that you understand what the drivers to good behaviour or good standard is, and then understand what performance KPIs and targets should be. And they should be both ESG, they should be accounting regulations, they should be all the other things. And then everybody knows what good looks like, and everybody knows what their responsibilities are, the roles and responsibilities within that framework should be. For me, it can be done. It's whether you want it to be done. It's not difficult as far as I'm concerned.
Sure. Okay. Jonathan, I'll come to you in a second. Mark, you were nodding vigorously at one point there. What were you agreeing with particularly?
I just totally agree with a lot of what Paul has said. I think he's spoken excellently this morning about the Charity Commission setting the standards, about having common standards across multiple organisations, in our case across all of the football clubs, knowing what good looks like. I also agree with the idea that the regulator shouldn't be there as a stick. It should be there as a carrot as well. It should be there to support clubs. Ashley Brown is someone who's on my focus groups for my research, and actually talks a lot of sense. He's had a lot of experience doing this, and I think there's two things that he's sort of said to me that really stick out, and one of them is about the regulator being supportive, and the other one is about the sort of the nature of football, and sort of allowing owners who seem to be a particular breed of people. Flamboyance was the word that he used, allowing some flamboyance. So one of the questions that you originally posed to Kieran was sort of what are the barriers? And I think some of the barriers are to do with the British political culture and the neoliberal economy that we're in, and we're trying to impose a very socialist sporting model on what is effectively a capitalist type model.
Yeah.
And trying to constrain that with things like FFP for me is just not working. I agree with the idea that if you have, I mean, you know, I'm a Stoke fan, you know, for my sins. So I'm accused of being biased in this, but I think if you've got an owner who's prepared to put money in and ask for nothing in return in terms of it being debt or anything else, what's the harm? I mean, if you have the dream of, you know, a small club, you know, or Stoke winning the Premier League one day, which, you know, given Leicester have done it, it's not completely unrealistic, we'd like to think. You know, how is that dream? No, that dream is part of what football is, and that's part of the culture. And I think that's a big reason why the ESL failed so badly, was because it took away that dream. And yeah, sorry, to answer the question. Yeah, that's why I'm nodding so vigorously, because I'm agreeing with what everyone's saying.
But no, that's good. I was hoping that was the case, but it's fine. So, Jonathan, coming to you next, you work across a number of sports. So, for me, it's almost ridiculous that it's taken this long for the idea of accountability and lack of sustainability in football to be such the subject that it is. It's, you know, it's 2021. It should have been addressed years ago. So, what other sports do you work in, particularly? And can you give us an example of a club or a sport or a governing body that's actually done it right that you come across on a regular basis?
I don't think there's any governing body or sport who got it 100% right. That's you know, if they did, people would be lauding it and holding it up high, whether it be various scandals with world governing bodies in the past at various bases. I would say if there was a league table of sports governance, football wouldn't sit very high on that league table. No. I think it would find itself dropping through the trapdoor so very, very quickly. And the frustration for me, when you ask the initial questions, what do we need to see? And the things I wrote down, good governance and effective enforcement. You know, it's, yeah, you can have all the rules you want in the world if you're not prepared to enforce it. And we've got a system at the moment where who actually governs football? And are they clean enough? And you've got within competitions, you've not got the old adage of turkeys voting for Christmas. You've actually got the question of, are they going to wring their own necks? Because
that's a great image.
Clubs voting on punishment for clubs over the ESL in the Premier League, but what's to say those clubs somewhere down the line won't think, well, you know, it could be us in the firing line here. Yeah. We're not going to punish them too hard. You know, we need that, or we need the next transfer. The next thing I wrote down was transparency and consistency. This is one area where other sports are very good. And just one example is within football, declarations of agent declarations, because that's one area I can speak of specifically. Yeah. And how up to date they are, and how consistent they are, and how true a picture they paint. And the last thing is, and this is different as well across territories, and I will say something here that with regards to regulation and governance, from my experience in football, that Kieran mentioned a meeting of minds. Well, to actually have a meeting of minds, first of all, you need effective communication. And we've got a situation within English football primarily, maybe not so much within Scottish football, but you compare the communication within English football to German football, where, yeah, they've got their interests of their stakeholders and their shareholders and so on and so forth. But when they're coming to address an issue, they're all round the table. They might not meet a general consensus, but when you've got people refusing to commit, we've got a situation at the moment with agents where there's somebody saying FIFA aren't communicating with us when FIFA are trying to communicate with them, but because they didn't communicate with them at the start, they're not going to talk to them now. And football lacks a lot of communication. I think English football is outstanding at that lack of communication, whether it be between leagues, whether it be between clubs in the same league, clubs in different leagues. The lack of effective communication is absolutely outstanding. And, you know, for me, it's incredibly frustrating. And I've said so many times, the various stakeholders and entities within football are like a set of kids squabbling. This might not be politically correct, but you want to bang their heads together. And that's quite simply it.
Virtually, of course, we can't condone violence. But just make sure if anyone's watching that thinks we can condone violence, we're doing that virtually. I'm glad you mentioned enforcement, because that's my next question. Nicely done, thank you. And the disciplinary measures and disciplinary system. So I'll stay with you, John. What can actually be done? Because if you're going to fine Manchester City £1 million for something, let's just say Man City, right? Let's pick them out of the hat. Fining Man City £1 million is, so what? That's nothing. If you find Accrington Stanley £25,000, that's massive to them. So for some clubs, a points deduction is far more serious punishment than fines, and vice versa. But there has to be one answer. In the same way that you look at again, if anyone from Sheffield Wednesday and Derby's watching, don't mean this personally, but look what Sheffield Wednesday and Derby have done with their selling their ground to themselves effectively. And Sheffield Wednesday get a points deduction. This season, Wigan went into administration for completely different reasons and got points deduction at the time and got relegated. So there's that Wigan fans say because they're a small club that nobody likes, and Sheffield Wednesday are a large club with history, and that's the reason why. It's probably not the case. But do you think there should be a levels of like a strata of punishment for these things, or should it just be you've committed this offence, this is your punishment?
Again, we're back to inconsistencies. The punishment for me has to, in effect, fit the crime. It's like I've got on the other screen here, I've got a list of the registered intermediaries with the FA. And there's 55 pages of it, and there's probably, 30-40 agents on each page. But when I look at the current suspended agents list in England, there's 6. Now, I'm sure everybody's a gal that they're definitely not angels, and I'll say to you here and now, they're not. But punishment fitting the crime, when you see somebody, there was a case involving, there's several cases involving clubs where clubs engage with an unlicensed intermediary.
Right.
How are they punished? They're punished with a fine. The intermediary is suspended. So the intermediary then goes off and acts as an unlicensed intermediary, and the governing body say, well, we can't do anything about it because they're unlicensed. But the club's engaging them.
Yeah.
So why are you fining the club? Why aren't you actually turning around to the club and saying, well, you engage with them in relation to this player. The punishment for that crime is don't let them play the player. They have to pay them. They can train. They're still an asset. But why doesn't that fit the crime? You've got financial crimes to agents and intermediaries. The biggest I've ever seen is £50,000. But if that agent has profited to the amount of, I don't know, 100,000, 500,000, well, that's a financial risk. That's risk and reward of that transaction. They're not actually doing anything effective. And the same with clubs. It's the consistency in having that scale of punishments. It's set out as to what it is. And the IAAF are very, very good with this, with their sanctions. It is set out. If you do it once, this is your punishment. If you do it a second time, this is your punishment.
Right.
And in some cases, if you do it a third time, it's a categorical lifetime ban. And there's different scales. But I think the other area of this, where the so-called governing bodies shoot themselves in the foot in football is, one, they're not quick at doing it. We've got a situation at the moment where there could be a punishment for a club that affects which league they're in. So that doesn't only affect that club, it affects the clubs around them. So is somebody going down, somebody going up? Have they got to plan themselves financially? But the other thing as well that really drives me balmy is that football sets these criteria for following rules and regulations and then sanctions. And it's become a bit of a joke now. Don't worry about what they sanction you the first time, just appeal it and they'll either get overturned, thrown out or reduced.
Yeah.
So they've got to be sure in their investigations and their sanctions, and that stick has got to be effective. They've got to know that, oh yeah, it's all very well waving a stick at them. Are you going to use it?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I'll come to Kieran next. That I saw a league table of agents' fees paid by football by English professional clubs on Welsh, of course. So you look at, if you had the all 92 clubs in one long table, Sunderland finished this season in 48th, if you like. Is that right? Yeah, just 48th. And yet in the agents' fees league table, they were 15th. They paid more agents' fees than I think 6 Premier League clubs and many clubs in the Championship. Supposedly, that was my club actually came quite high up in League One, bizarrely, because obviously I think our budget was 22nd out of 24, but agents' fees we were something like 13th, 14th. So how is that? I'm not saying it shouldn't be allowed to happen, but it seems ridiculous that clubs in League One, well, you look at when Sunderland bought Will Grigg for £4 million, put him on the bench, and the playing teams like us and Burton and Accrington, who Accrington have never spent £4 million in total in their history. I'm not asking for a level playing field, but I just think that just seems to be, it's not punching above your weight, but it just seems ridiculous amount of money to spend on trying to get out of League One. Kieran, the price of football seems like an apt phrase. You're muted, Kieran. Yeah. I can't unmute you.
That's okay.
There you go.
When I have spoken to chief executives with regards to the issue of agents, they've said we don't complain about this most of the time. We don't actually have an issue, because if we've got a good relationship with the agent and the agent's looking after the player's interests, if the player's unhappy about something, the agent actually operates as this concept of the intermediary. It can actually be quite intimidating. If you're 23 or 24 years old and you're not happy about something in relation to your contract, going to a chief executive who's twice your age, is likely to be a graduate, who's worked in the industry for 20 or 30 years, can be quite intimidating. So a good agent makes sure that the club's always up to date, the players' interests looked after. And when I have spoken to people, that they've said we're quite happy about that. We get a player for a longer time, or it helps us in terms of recruitment. So I don't actually have an issue in terms of agents and agents' fees. It's an easy stick. I mean, I'm presently about 2/3 of the way through reading The Secret Agent, and it's a fantastic read, and it's highly entertaining, and it's very tabloid-esque. But there was sort of a central theme of there's good guys and there's cowboys, and that's I'm an accountant, okay? I can assure you that's exactly the same in the world of accounting. It's same in the world of teaching. I'm sure Mark knows some people who steal a living in what we do. It's the same in law. So I don't have an issue. So going back to punishment and crime and the issues that Jonathan raised, there are fixed tariffs for breaches of financial fair play, and we've seen those published. So they do exist. The problem is the concept of profit and the concept of cost and the concept of what is allowable for financial fair play. That in itself is less objective. There's far more subjectivity involved. Why did the EFL, for example, change their own regulations in 2016, which allowed clubs to sell the stadiums to themselves? Why have the EFL rejected the key findings of the Jonathan Taylor QC report in terms of governance? So when things like that happen, you end up thinking, well, football doesn't want governance. It certainly doesn't want external regulation or influence, because it's quite happy the way that it runs itself, even if that's not on a sustainable perspective, because the people involved in the industry are getting on fine.
Sure. Paul? Paul is muted.
Yeah, first of all, just to respond to Jonathan's first point about communication, it's been my experience in 15 years working in the industry that football governing bodies will communicate very, very quickly when there's a common threat. And that whether that's from government or whether that's from anywhere else, they all they all know each other really well. They all get on incredibly well. I was part of that, if you like, but they'll close together against a common threat. That's the first thing. And again, I come back to talking about agents. Agents are a key player, and as Kieran has stated, that they have a critical role to play within football. It's just a bit like the Wild West, that's all. It has been in the past. And I keep coming back to say, once you start using the word regulator, let's call it a commission, because it's a nicer word, okay? Because football doesn't like regulator, okay? So an organisation that sits above or to the side or whatever, that is effectively regulating. In this context, it could be supporting, it could be, if there was a grant giving capability, it would have that capability. Anything that requires an intermediary, if you like, across the current football, that's what a regulator would do. And in this particular instance, there would be an agreed code of conduct. Let's call it a code of conduct, okay? Let's call it, which would outline what good looks like and what each player within that environment, what good looks like for them. So from agents' perspective, we'd all agree, everybody would agree that that's what agents do, that's what they should do, that's what they shouldn't do, and if they transgress, they get hammered like everybody else. Or they were allowed to thrive as an industry. At the moment, they're just, depending on who you are within they're effectively, they get beaten up, I think, because it's easy to do. When things go wrong in a football club, it's all the agent's fault. We're paying too much money to agents or whatever it is, okay? Yeah. Everybody understood what the roles and responsibilities were in the environment, and everybody agreed what the code of conduct was. Okay? And everybody understood what the standards, the minimum standards we expected. That's what we should be aiming for me.
Yeah. Sure. Okay. Mark, I'm going to talk to you about that as well. But also, is it time for, and I'm going to use an awful phrase, off-ball, like the off is a fair trading, but for football, in the way that Ofsted works well for schools, Ofcom, it had to be called off-ball. Off-foot sounds bizarre, but there's a similar organisation in the Netherlands, which seems to work for them, we think. But is that feasible? Would there be too much pushing back against something like that?
I think that's viable. We need to sort of consider what are the options in terms of governance for English football.
It should be called offside. Sorry, carry on.
No, we can't call it that. For me, the 50+1 just isn't going to work. We have far too many clubs, the traditional heritage, and to be fair, I come back to the neoliberal political system that we operate in the UK. Yeah. Is not like the German system. Or all German companies, for example, have to have an employee and an employee director on the board by law. We don't have a culture in our country that allows for that type of stakeholder involvement in the running of organizations. So we have to, and how are you going to buy the clubs off the owners? How are you going to get Stoke off the Coats? How are you going to get Chelsea off Abramovich? Who's going to pay for that? Okay, so I don't personally think that 50+1 is a practical solution for the UK. So we have to start looking at other mechanisms. And the regulator, I think, is the best one that's been suggested as far as I can see. Is it realistic? I was having a conversation with someone, I forget who it was now, but The view is, with Boris Johnson as Prime Minister, yes, it probably can. We have a populist government who will do anything to win votes. And if they can win votes through giving football back to the people, like they did with the country, if you want to believe that, then I don't believe they're above that. So do I think it's possible? Yes. Personally, I think it needs to come from the top. I think it needs to come from the government. There's a debate over whether who the regulator should be. Should it be someone completely new and independent, or should it be the FA? I mean, I'm an avid listener to Kieran's podcast, and one of the debates that he's had on there is the fact that the FA have washed their hands of league football. The FA are somewhat biased, because if you look at the people that make up the FA, you have people from league football in the FA. So if it's going to be the FA, then the FA need to sort of redeem themselves and kind of make themselves more independent from the leagues. Or we have an independent regulator that's set up by the government, and as you said, an off foot, off ball, off whatever you want to call it, offside. And yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's needed. I think with the wind that's behind the sort of change towards supporters' views at the moment, absolutely.
This is the time to do it. Obviously, I'm speaking from a slightly biased. I know I should be neutral as the chair of this, but obviously the team I support is fan-owned. Before someone tells me off, trust-owned. In fact, it's fan-owned, but trust-owned is the correct phrase. It works for us. It works fantastically for us. Without our fans, this lovely ground behind me that you can see wouldn't be finished.
Well, you have to ask yourself where if you look at all the clubs that are fan-owned, trust-owned, call it what you want, we're effectively talking about the same thing.
Yeah.
How have they been born? Most of them have been born out of adversity, and that it's not been a very sort of friendly, oh hello, we're the fans, we've come up with this money, please can we buy our football clubs. That fans are almost the owners of last resort. And if you look at all the clubs that have become fan owned, and it tends to be distress sales, and there tends to be football clubs aren't allowed to die. And one of my favorite books in football is Soccernomics by Simon Cooper and Stefan Szymanski. Fantastic read, real good insight into it's the free economics of football. It's fantastic, and they make the point in there. I've lost my train of thought now. Sorry, I was completely.
About Soccernomics.
Yeah. But what was I saying just before that? I'm very sorry. It's just gone.
No, it's quite all right. We were talking about fan ownership and whether you're right. It works for us because we started as a fan-owned club. You can't transfer to a fan ownership. That's ridiculous. Yeah,
that's the sort of point that they make. The point is, football clubs aren't allowed to die. Okay? And one of the things that we talk about in accountancy is about the legitimacy of an organisation. And if a company has no social capital or legitimacy, has no relevance to society, then people stop buying its products and so on and so forth. But for a football club, the actual club has just unerring so much legitimacy, if you like, in the club as being part of the fabric of society. What doesn't have legitimacy is the owners, and that it's the owners that sort of need to justify themselves and their position, if that makes sense. So sorry, I'm totally digressing because I'm excited about this, but I'll let Paul come in.
His actual hand up, not just Zoom hand, his actual hand.
My actual hand was up. Yeah, it's interesting. It's a conversation, but life is, as always, about timing. And I go back to 97 through to 2000. New Labour government came to power at that time. It just happened to be Labour at the time. High populist government on a wave. It saw football as a way to speak to the people. Very similar as it is today, where Boris is trying to level up and trying to appeal to the north. From that, without going too long-winded about it, came the Football Foundation and Supporters Direct. And that was Andy Burnham's intervention, as from his position working for Secretary of State. And so I think we're in a sort of similar place right now. I think we'll never be in a better position to establish a regulator. I think Tracy Crouch is an incredibly honest individual, honest MP, loves football, will listen to supporters and anybody else, and will come up with some very, very good recommendations. I think she will talk to Fair Game, she'll talk to the Neville Group, she'll talk to other people. I think that, you know, it is a populist government, and I think that they're in a similar position, because I think the Super League was a shot, you know, football basically shot itself in the foot. And I think there is now a well-recognised understanding that support, you know, football clubs are owned by supporters. Even people of the 650 MPs, that, you know, majority Tory government, all those MPs and ministers who had no interest in football up until now understand the problem because of the European Super League.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that this could be an opportunity to be wasted. You know, if the groups all don't come together, and they all don't come together, you know, as one to report through Tracy's review back up to government. If they don't, if they will be divided and conquered, and that's the usual way of dealing with things in football. The organisation that sits out from the group, if you like, is always divided. They always quite try and separate.
Yeah.
So my advice really is to work very closely with all the groups. And it's one thing saying we need let's call it a regulator, let's call it a commission, let's call it off-ball, whatever you want to call it, okay? The most important thing is to define what that organisation does, and then promote it as a positive thing. And that is to support football clubs, to help football clubs. Yes, it's going to create a code of conduct, and yes, it's going to create and articulate the environment, and yes, it's going to talk about roles and responsibilities within that environment and what their responsibilities are to the sustainability of the whole. Yeah. And that will create the code of conduct, and that should be agreed by football across the board, and it will be a compromise situation. But once that's in place, then the independent commissioner, let's call it, rather than a regulator, or whatever you want to call it, you can call it a commissioner, don't call it a regulator, whatever you want to call it.
Or a czar. Please don't use the word czar.
Whatever you want to call it, okay? Their responsibility, just like in Parliament, standards commissioner in Parliament, it's not called a standards regulator for a reason, okay? She is an act of Parliament. Will need to get rid of her. She's a 5-year term.
Wow. She's
absolutely unsackable unless you go through Parliament and have an act of Parliament to get rid of her. And she is there both to support, and that's her principal role, but also, of course, to review transgressions and apply the sanctions formula.
Sure, thank you. So, Kieran, what we're talking about here is this isn't just a little mind shift or a slight tweak to how football is run. This is a complete restructuring and renegotiation of football's sort of central finances, which in itself is a fantastic idea and of course would solve an awful lot of football's issues. How feasible is this? I know this is called fair game and we want to make it a fairer game, but just how feasible is it to be restructured, and how fair does it need to be? The idea of fairness and balance, you know, it's life is unfair, life is unbalanced. I'm not saying my life's unfair, but, you know, generally speaking, how feasible is this? Can you as a football expert, podcaster, financier, accountant know that this is actually possible? Because otherwise we're just talking about stuff it's a great idea, but it's not practical.
Well, left to its own devices, nothing will happen. There will be no significant change.
Yeah.
I think Paul's absolutely right. If we have a commissioner, if we have a general manager of football, whatever the title is going to be, that's not going to come from the industry itself, or if it does, the industry is going to choose who that person is, and we're back to the old boys network. So I agree that it has to come from central government, I'm not. I'm a believer in light touch if you can, and when we start to talk about fairness, fairness only ever exists if everybody wins. In the minds of, because otherwise there's going to be some winners and some losers. I put out something recently suggesting we just to look at the financial consequences of moving to an NFL style model where home teams keep 60% of gate receipts and merchandise income. The remainder gets pooled, reconvene the figures. And immediately I was jumped upon by Manchester United, Chelsea, Liverpool fans saying this is unfair. And I was saying, well, if having 3.5 times the amount of revenue compared to the bottom teams in the Premier League is bad compared to the present 5.5, is it really that bad? And they say, well, we're not in competition with the Premier League. We're in competition with Barcelona, Madrid and Bayern. So I think it will be very difficult because the clubs do have different sets of goals. It certainly will not make progress internally. That there will be prevarication, there will be excuses, and we will end up with a very diluted set of rules. Even if there is a commissioner, it then comes down to what their rights and responsibilities and ability to govern will be, because otherwise you end up with the equivalent of a constitutional monarch. And some of the things which have concerned me recently is that I've lots of people coming to me and say, well, 50+1's the answer. I say, well, look at Munich have won it for the last 7 years, and that's a 50+1. Do you want a dynasty? Because that's what potentially you'll end up with. Is a commissioner right if the commissioner A is a person who is truly independent, and B has the ability to get involved with the game as opposed to just being a figurehead, then yes, I think we can start to move the dial. Without that, I think we will be having this conversation in 10 years' time, nodding along with each other and just become an echo chamber.
Let's try and avoid that. So, Jonathan, I'm going to come to you. What you talk about dynasty? It's a good point you make there, Kieran, about the dynasty. Looking at Juventus didn't win the Serie A for the first time in 10 years. And we've got a smaller, wider dynasty in our league. The occasional Leicester will win the Premier League. But for me, what is good about the way that our football works is that next season, Sheffield Wednesday versus Sunderland is a league game in the same division as Accrington versus Morecambe. That's fantastic. That's what football's about for me. I love that. Obviously, I support a small team, and it's great that those teams are in that division. Without that, this offside, or we're going to call it a commissioner, that's going to become less and less obvious and less realistic across Europe. You don't see that. So we're in danger of losing that kind of. I hate the word romance because it's not romantic. People talk about the romance of the FA Cup. It's not romantic at all. I lost a date because I went to an FA Cup game. How realistic is it then that we can change the whole infrastructure of football's financing to make sure that those fixtures continue to be in such disparity?
I think, like Kieran's just said, we'll be here with the same conversation in 10 years' time. And I'm sure everybody here can talk about, but this happened 5 years ago. Somebody said this 10 years ago. Yeah. You can go through the archives of DCMS select committees saying, oh, yeah, something's got to change. Something's got to change. Yeah, okay. See you in 2 years. I think there's a bigger role and responsibility now than ever for, and I don't just say fans, I say stakeholders. Mm-hmm. Something that, that some of the governing bodies find it hard to accept. Who are their actual stakeholders? And there's been a lot of talk about custodians of clubs. Who's a custodian of football at the moment? Uh-huh. We all own it. All the stakeholders own it, but who's a custodian? And I think it's important for, without it sounding like a rallying cry, the people who are involved here and the people in the other organisations, whether it be David Bernstein's group, or the likes of the guys at the FSA, to actually hold people to account. Because I've heard so many empty threats, promises. Oh, I'm really interested in this matter. And the important thing is that when there's been, there was a hearing in the House of Commons about a vote of confidence in the FA. How many MPs attended that hearing? Like, you know, there's more in there when COVID was at its heights than there was on that hearing. It passed through, but nobody actually did anything about it. And I think a lot of people are holding out a lot of hope because their eyes have been opened with the likes of Super League and Project Big Picture, and a lot of fans their eyes are now open. But what they've got to realise, and other stakeholders have got to realise, whether you be a coach, a manager, a referee, a fan, an administrator, a trust, a person on a trust, you've got to be aware these things have happened before. And it isn't so much holding just clubs and those sorts of elements to account, but the people who are now on this fan-led review, hold them to account, that they actually follow through with things. We don't want another report. Okay, we'll commission another report in 12 years' time. We'll have another hearing of, I don't know, the Premier League, the FA called for a common select committee and asked what powers you want. I'm still waiting for Greg Clark's answer to that from 4 or 5 years ago, because he couldn't answer it then. He said he'd go back to them and he never did. So I think people's eyes have been opened, but it's the responsibility of stakeholders as a whole, fans and everybody else, to make sure it's not just the people who have neglected their responsibilities, that we actually point them out and say, well, you said this, you were going to do this, you promised this. And there's not only accountability for them, I think there's accountability for a massive group to make sure they answer, make sure they do their responsibilities.
But you look at, let's use the phrase Bury were allowed to die. Okay, I don't think many people would dispute that they were allowed to die. And I may be wrong on this. I was told these statistics. I've looked them up. It's somewhere. It's proved. Macclesfield went bust, and what they owed, Gareth Bale earns in 8 hours and 47 minutes. Now that's good for him. Great, right? That's fantastic. I'm not expecting Gareth Bale to buy Macclesfield or bail them out. I'm just using that we're talking about the same sport, and that disparity of wages and income. Obviously, COVID has had a massive effect. But my point, eventually come to that, is that 6 months ago, 8 months ago, people were talking about if COVID continued the whole season with no fans, then there'll be up to maybe 24 clubs going bust. Didn't happen. No one has. So how did clubs manage to get through that then? If you look about restructuring football, the clubs have done it themselves. Okay, there's bailouts and all that kind of stuff, but it's still amazing to me that no clubs went bust and most clubs didn't have a home game. My team didn't have a single home game with fans, because when it was possible in London for a couple of weeks, ground wasn't quite finished. So, we've managed to go through a whole season and survived, and other clubs have done it. How's it possible? I'll come to Mark as a lecturer. Lecture me. How does this work?
Thank you. I've got a couple of points to make, if that's okay. So I've just been listening to what Kieran and particularly Jonathan has been saying. So if you'll indulge me, but I will answer your point first. How has this worked? I think first of all, as the safety net of the loans and grants, Kieran probably knows a bit more about this than I do, but I think it was a loan system that were given to clubs. Now, that certainly has helped clubs. I think I Follow has had obviously it's nowhere near your gate receipts, but I know clubs are sort of earning 200,000. Clubs were able to reduce their costs because they're not putting it on the games. And I think it's a combination of factors that has allowed the sort of continuation of these clubs, even if it's in a bit of a financial limbo. Coming to your point about Bury was allowed to die, Macclesfield was allowed to die.
Yep.
yes, by their peers in terms of the football clubs, but not by the fans. In both of those instances, the fans have started Phoenix clubs. And this comes back to the point I was making about Stefan Szymanski and Stephen Cooper's book, is that, you know, clubs are generally not allowed to. I think the only one really is Accrington Stanley when they went bust in the 60s, and they didn't have a football club for so many years. But even there, you know, eventually there's been a Phoenix club. So fans don't let their clubs die. There's usually a Phoenix club that comes out of the ashes of disaster. The other thing that I wanted to pick up on, Jonathan mentioned about stakeholders, and I teach quite a bit of stakeholder theory in my courses. And the stakeholders generally, if you look at stakeholders of a normal organization, there's three ways that we judge the salience, if you like, the importance of stakeholders, and that's power, legitimacy, and urgency. And if you consider a fan as a stakeholder, do they have power? No, not really. In terms of owners, you know, players have more power in terms of saying what goes on in the football club than supporters do. Do they have legitimacy? Oh my God, yes. Yeah, they are the lifeblood of the game. Do they have urgency? Well, not in the eyes of owners or some owners. When you have a stakeholder like a fan, if it was a normal customer relationship, you would have a stakeholder like that would have three options if they weren't happy with the relationship. Okay, they would have voice, they would have legal, and they would have exit. Now, legal takes money, so for fans to raise a major legal challenge against a football club is very difficult. Exit is not an option. Okay, many fans are born into supporting a club, or it's the town that they're from, or, you know, once you choose a football club, you don't, you know, if Wimbledon went bust, you wouldn't start supporting, you know, a different football club down the road. If Stoke went bust, I'm not going to go to Vale, right? So that just leaves supporters with voice. So if you can, what I'm trying to say is actually, as a stakeholder, fans need protection because they don't have the power and the urgency that you know, backs up their legitimacy, if that makes sense.
Yeah, we've only got a few minutes left. Paul, stakeholder engagement. Obviously, Mark, apologies, has been very eloquent about how stakeholders are, you know, massively important to any organisation. But do you think fans are kind of, what's the word? Not disregarded, but should fans have more power? Would it actually work? Obviously, in my club, it does work, and it does work at Exeter, and did work at Wickham or other clubs, Barcelona, of course, the obvious one everyone trots out. But is fan, not fan ownership, but fan representation? Perhaps that's the way, or a way forward.
I think there's a couple of things. One is everybody recognises this. I mean, you go through the last year, football just hasn't been football without fans and supporters on the ground. Everybody understands that. They also pay the money to come through the gate, which for some clubs is a considerable amount of money, and it's the difference between, you know, staying afloat and not staying afloat. For me, I think you're dealing with inertia a lot of the time. You're dealing with a group of a massive hundreds of thousands of people who love football, millions of people who love football. But can they be bothered a lot of the time to get involved in the politics and all the rest of it? Yes, they'll moan. And it's interesting that Mark was saying is that of the three things that stakeholders, one is the voice. Fans did they use their voice, didn't they, recently? They really did use their voice. When they want to, when it really fires them up, they use their voice because they saw a threat. But the interesting thing is they were whipped up, if you recall, by a few people in the media, by the Premier League, there was that common threat. You know, everybody spoke with one, those people who knew what the threat was. And I have to tell you, you know, that threat was boiling and brewing for years and years. It's been used as you know, as Steve Parish says, it's been used as, you know, the threat's been threatened all these years.
Yeah.
And over the last couple of years, it didn't come out of the blue. I know for a fact that the Premier League were worried about this for quite some time. So when it happened, when on that Sunday evening it happened, you had Gary Neville on the TV You had everybody speaking one voice, and that whipped up the voice, and the voice spoke. And then you had all the situation on every single game. You had I think it was Chelsea and Arsenal, Spurs had their games on alternative nights, and it erupted. And so, but I think that if you, following the theme of what we're talking about, if you go down the line of giving supporters power, I think it will fail.
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to create an environment that is the right environment for football. Everybody agrees. As I said, football doesn't want this. Football doesn't want a commissioner. It doesn't want any of that, because it wants to just muddle through and get by and do deals and all the rest of it. It doesn't want any of this. But I think that I think now, if it doesn't happen now, it never will. I think that we have the opportunity, and it's about using that opportunity. But I think it's about protecting the supporters, because the support, if you put it the other way around, supporters, yes, if you give we want more power for the supporters, the 50 plus, whatever, it's not going to work. It will not work in the UK. However, if you talk about protecting it for the fans and the supporters, protecting clubs, protecting the structure, protecting the competitive nature of the pyramid and the rest of it, then you're protecting that. The commissioner or regulator will protect that. It's not about I don't think it's about giving supporters power.
No, fine. Kieran, do you want to sum up? I've got one little humorous question for you all after this, but Kieran, do you want to sum up what you think what can be achieved? So I'm saying fan representation may be the way I'm looking at it, as a fan who is represented.
I think fan representation or fan influence, yes. Fan ownership, as Mark said earlier, is a complete non-starter. And when you look at clubs such as Exeter and Portsmouth, they've gone from private to fan back to private. I think the conclusions broadly are that we can't allow football to look after itself, because the track record isn't particularly good. And therefore, some form of influence, some form of external help, and I think that's the way that it's got to be communicated to fans and both and clubs themselves. As Paul was saying, we're not there to we're not there to finger wag. We're there to say this is best practice, and to try to get the culture within within club ownership and within club boardrooms to change. There are plenty of good examples out there, and ideally the commissioner, whatever it's going to be, is going to look at the best of the best and set that down as a template. And if that is the case, then it will be a step forward. Will football's problems disappear? No, because there will still be that mentality of get your checkbook out, speculate to accumulate, and all the normal things that we see come. We've got a media which is based on encouraging everybody to believe that spending money is a good thing within the game. And I can't see that changing either. And that then becomes the normality in terms of fan thinking as well. Whenever you do communicate with the message boards and the phone-ins and things of that nature.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. That's been fantastic. So to Kieran, Paul, Mark and Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for your time. However, we have one small question. We're talking about football. This has been quite intense. We've been talking about how football is run. We are football fans. We want to see good football. I'm going to ask you all, so starting with Kieran, who do you think is going to win the Euros?
Belgium.
Paul?
Yeah, unfortunately, Belgium.
Mark, are you going to say Belgium as well?
England.
Excellent. Okay, that's love that. Jonathan?
Portugal.
Oh, left field. Excellent. Well, I thought I'd end on a slightly more cheery note. Okay. I think I've gone for Belgium if De Bruyne plays. If De Bruyne's broken face doesn't heal, then France. But hey, what can you do? Gentlemen, thank you for your time. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for your patience and for your cooperation and concentration as well. So thank you all. I'm going to hand back to Sam now. Go and enjoy your lunch and enjoy the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
I'm going to jump in here, Sam, just because I'm finally back. So thank you. Just a huge thank you to that panel. Wonderful thanks to Jonathan, to Paul, to Kieran, to Mark, And Kevin, thank you very much for being a wonderful host for this afternoon session. I hope everybody's enjoyed it, and we've had a great experience. And for the benefit, because I am married to a Scot, I'm going to say Scotland, but they've got no chance. But what the hell?
No, but you've got to say it. You've got to say it. John's here. John Scales. Who do you think's going to win the Euros?
I'm English through and through, so I'm going with
Wales.
us.
Okay, well, we'll hold you to that. This is recorded, so we'll check back on July the 11th at 10 p.m. Or maybe 10:30 extra time. We'll check, so you've got that right. But I reckon one of us has got this right, and it's probably Jonathan. But hey,
Scotland Wales final.
Yes, fantastic.
Right.
Yeah, Austria, Bosnia final. Bosnia, North Macedonia, Austria final. Perfect. Right. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you. We'll all be back for those who are tuning in for the afternoon session that starts at 1:30. Enjoy your lunch and see you all. Thank you so much. Really insightful. Thank you, everybody.